AI doesn't just change how work gets done, it changes who does the work and what their job looks like. When AI enters your organization, you've got a choice: replace the role entirely or redesign the job around what AI can't do. One creates efficiency, the other creates capability. Today, replace roles or redesign jobs. Let's figure out which one fits your situation. Welcome to Binary Business. I'm Will Guidry. This is episode 3. We're using the ABCD framework to break down AI decisions that operators actually face. Today's decision is uncomfortable. When AI can do part of someone's job, do you eliminate the role or do you redefine what that person does? This isn't about layoffs, it's about leverage. So let's get into it. Replace roles or redesign jobs. Here's the scenario. You bring AI into your organization. It can handle 60% of what your customer support team does, or 40% of what your analysts do, or 70% of what your operating coordinators do. Now you've got a decision. Option 1, replace the role. If AI can do 60% of the work, you need 40% fewer people. You reduce headcount, cut costs, and redeploy budget somewhere else. Option 2, redesign the job. The people stay, but their role changes. They're no longer doing the repetitive work AI handles, they're doing the complex work AI can't. Most companies try to avoid this decision entirely. They bring in AI, keep everyone in their current roles, and hope productivity just goes up. Here's what actually happens. The AI sits underutilized because people are still doing the work manually. Or the team uses AI, but their workload doesn't change because they're now spending time reviewing AI outputs instead of doing the original tasks. Or the job changes informally. Nobody talks about it, and 6 months later, the team is frustrated because the role isn't what they signed up for. This decision doesn't go away by ignoring it. So let's break down when replacing roles makes sense and when redesigning jobs creates more leverage. Here's what I see work and what I see break. Binary number 1. Replace the role. Replacing the role means that if AI can do 60% of the work, you reduce headcount by 60%. The role no longer exists, or it exists at a much smaller scale. Here's when that works. First, the work is entirely transactional. If the role is purely execution with no strategic component, replacement makes sense. Data entry, basic reporting, Tier 1 customer support, these roles exist because manual labor is required. When AI removes that requirement, the role goes away. Second, the business is optimizing for cost. If your primary constraint is profitability and headcount is the biggest expense, replacing roles creates immediate financial impact. Third, the people in the role see it as temporary. If your team knows the work is transactional and they're actively looking to move into higher value roles, replacement can be a forcing function. You're not eliminating opportunity. You're accelerating a transition that was already happening. But here's what happens when you replace roles without thinking through the second-order effects. You lose institutional knowledge because the person doing Tier 1 support also knows which customers are high value, which issues are recurring, and which escalations need immediate attention. Replace that role, and that knowledge disappears. You create political resistance as well. So even if the work is transactional, people notice when roles get eliminated. The remaining team sees this as a threat, then trust erodes. Adoption of future AI initiatives slows down because people think that they're next. You could also lose flexibility. When edge cases show up that AI can't handle, you don't have people who understand the work anymore. You've optimized for efficiency and sacrificed adaptability. So replacing roles works when the work is purely transactional and the business is optimizing for cost. It breaks when you need institutional knowledge, adaptability, or trust. Binary 0, redesign the job. Redesigning the job means the person stays, but their role evolves. AI handles the repetitive work. The person does the complex strategic relationship-driven work that AI can't do. Here's when this works. First, the role has a strategic component. If 60% of the job is transactional, but 40% requires judgment, relationships, or creativity, redesigning the job around that 40% creates leverage. Second, institutional knowledge matters. If the person doing the work understands the context, the exceptions, and the nuance, keeping them and elevating their role makes you faster and smarter. Third, you're optimizing for capability, not cost. If your constraint is capacity or decision quality, redesigning jobs around higher value work unlocks more leverage than cutting headcount. But here's the trap most companies fall into with job redesign. They tell people their jobs are being redesigned, but they don't actually redefine the work. The AI handles repetitive tasks. The person keeps doing what they were doing before, and now they're also managing AI outputs. The job didn't get redesigned, it got expanded. Or they redesign the job, but don't change the title, the comp, or the expectations. The person's doing high-value work, but they're still being measured on the old metrics. That creates frustration. Or worst case, they redesign the job around work the person doesn't want to do. Someone who liked the predictability of transactional work now has to do strategic, ambiguous work. They're not equipped for it. They don't enjoy it, and their performance drops. Redesigning jobs works when the role has strategic value and you invest in the transition. It fails when you bolt AI onto an unchanged job and then give it a new description and hope it works out. So here's the real question. This decision comes down to three things: the nature of the work, the value of institutional knowledge, and what you're optimizing for. When the work is transactional, institutional knowledge is low, and you're optimizing for cost. Redesign jobs when the work has a strategic component, institutional knowledge matters, and you're optimizing for capability. And here's the part most operators miss. This isn't a one-time decision. Roles evolve. What starts as a redesigned job might become a replacement role 6 months later as the AI improves. Or what starts as a replaced role might need to be rebuilt when you realize you lost critical knowledge. Stay flexible. Here's a quick reminder. If this kind of decision clarity is useful, subscribe. I'm breaking down one AI decision every Tuesday and Thursday. In the next episode, AI for executives or the front line. We're talking about where AI should show up first in your organization. All right, let's get into the ABCD. A is for audience. This is where you ask who's affected and how do they respond. If you replace roles, the obvious audience is the people whose roles are actually being eliminated. But the less obvious audience is everyone else who's watching. The team sees roles disappear and starts wondering if they're the next on the chopping block. That creates fear, which kills trust, which tanks adoption of future AI initiatives. Here's how to handle this. Be honest about what's happening and why. If you're replacing roles to cut costs, just say that. If you're replacing roles because the work is going away, explain what's replacing it and where the people affected can go next. The worst thing you can do is replace roles quietly and hope that nobody notices. They will, and they'll assume the worst. Now, if you redesign jobs instead of replacing them, the audience shifts. The people whose jobs are being redesigned need to understand what their new role looks like. If you tell someone, look, AI is handling the repetitive work, now you're doing strategic work, but you don't define what that means, they'll default to doing what they've always done. So here's a test. Ask the person whose job is being redesigned, what does success look like in your new role? If they can't answer clearly, the redesign hasn't happened yet. You just added AI without removing work. The other audience question. How does this affect the people downstream? If customer support roles get replaced, do your customers notice? If analyst roles get redesigned, does your executive team get better insights or just different reports? Map the ripple effects before you decide. B is for build. This is the systems layer. This is where you ask what infrastructure supports this decision. If you replace roles, you need systems that handle edge cases without human intervention. That means robust error handling, escalation paths, and monitoring. Because when something breaks and there's no one at that role anymore, the system has to catch it. I've seen companies replace roles assuming that the AI will handle everything. And then they get buried in edge cases 6 months later. They end up rehiring for the same role they eliminated because the system wasn't ready to operate independently. So if you're redesigning jobs, you need training systems. The person doing transactional work for 5 years doesn't automatically know how to do strategic work. You need to teach them. And not just, here's a training module, real coaching, real mentorship, real support. Here's the mistake. Companies redesign jobs, tell people their roles aren't changing, and expect them to figure it out. That's not fair, and it doesn't work. The other build question: what happens to the work that falls through the cracks? Because there's always something that's going to fall through the cracks. When you replace roles, some work will be too complex for AI, but too infrequent to justify a full-time person. Who handles that? If the answer is nobody, you're going to have problems. So when you redesign jobs, some people will struggle with the transition, some will thrive, some will leave. Do you have a plan for backfilling critical knowledge if someone exits during the transition? Build the messy middle, not just the clean outcome. C is for convert. This is the revenue lens. This is where you ask, how does this decision affect the money? Replacement roles create immediate cost savings. If you're paying $60K per person and you eliminate 5 roles, that's $300K in savings. That's real, that flows to the bottom line. But replacing roles also creates risk. If you cut too deep, if you lose critical knowledge, if edge cases pile up on you, you'll end up rehiring at a higher cost because now you're hiring under pressure. I've seen companies cut headcount and then realize later that they overcorrected and they rehired the same roles at 20% higher comp because the market moved. The short-term savings evaporated. Redesigning the job doesn't create immediate cost savings, but you're paying the same people. And if you redesign the work, you're getting higher value output from the same headcount. That's leverage. Here's the math. If an analyst used to spend 60% of their time pulling reports and 40% doing analysis, and AI now handles the reporting, that analyst should be doing 2.5 more times analysis. If that analysis drives better decisions, the ROI isn't in cost savings, it's in decision quality. But here's the trap. Most companies redesign jobs, assume productivity will increase, and don't measure it. Later, they're not sure if the redesign created value or just shifted work around. If you redesign jobs, define the new success metrics before the transition. What does higher value work look like? How do you measure it? What's the expected output increase? If you can't define that, you're not redesigning the job, you're just hoping it works out. D is for deliver. This is where you look downstream. This is where you ask what happens after roles are replaced or jobs are redesigned. When you replace roles, delivery becomes more consistent but less flexible. AI handles the work the same way every time. That's good when consistency matters, but it's bad when exceptions matter. A client replaced their Tier 1 customer support roles with AI. Response time dropped from 8 minutes to 45 seconds. The customers absolutely loved it, except when they didn't. For 80% of inquiries, the AI was perfect. For 20%, the AI escalated to Tier 2 support. But Tier 2 support wasn't built to handle that volume. Queue time spiked, customer satisfaction for complex issues tanked. They had to rebuild Tier 2 support to handle the escalation load. The cost savings from eliminating Tier 1 support got partially offset by expanding Tier 2. That's a second-order effect that they didn't plan for. So when you redesign jobs, delivery becomes more strategic but harder to standardize. You've got people doing higher value work, but that work looks different for each person. One analyst focuses on pricing. Another focuses on customer segmentation. A third focuses on operational efficiency. That's powerful, but it's also harder to manage. You can't standardize strategic work the way you can standardize transactional work. So here's the question. Does your organization have the management capability to lead people doing strategic, ambiguous work? Or are your managers trained to oversee transactional execution? If it's the latter, redesigning jobs without upgrading management is a recipe for absolute chaos. All right, well, here's the call. Most companies try to avoid the decision. They bring in AI, keep everyone in their current roles, and hope productivity increases organically. It doesn't. You have to make a choice. Replace the role or redesign the job. Replace the role when the work is transactional, institutional knowledge is low, and cost is the primary constraint. Be honest about it. Plan for edge cases. Invest in systems that can operate without human intervention. Redesign jobs when the role has strategic value, institutional knowledge matters, and you're optimizing for capability. Redefine the work clearly, train people for the transition, and then measure the new success metrics. And here's the part most operators miss. This decision isn't permanent. Roles evolve. AI improves. What strategic work today might be automatable, if that's a word, in 12 months. Stay flexible. Revisit the decision every quarter and ask yourself, is this role still creating value, or has AI capability shifted enough that we should reconsider? One more thing. Don't redesign jobs as a way to avoid hard conversations about headcount. I've seen companies tell people that their jobs are being elevated to strategic work when really the roles should be eliminated. That's dishonest. It creates false hope, and a few months later, when performance doesn't improve, you're having the hard conversation anyway, except now all your trust is gone. So if the role should be replaced, replace it. If the job should be redesigned, redesign it. But don't use redesign as a soft layoff. Do this with intention. Thanks for listening to Binary Business. If you're trying to figure out whether a role in your organization should be replaced or redesigned, use the Binary Decision Scorecard. It helps you see whether you're optimizing for the right outcome. Click the link in the description to get a copy. In the next episode of Binary Business, AI for executives or the front line? We're breaking down where AI should show up first in your organization. Subscribe so you don't miss out. If you're on YouTube, hit the like if this was useful. This is Binary Business. All signal, no noise.